Now, I want to introduce you to another concept, and then we'll take a look at, again, the concept, the means of action, and the social result. So I'm going to introduce you to another concept. Let's say now with these beans live in a particular neighborhood, and if you take a look at, like in the grocery store, these beans are all together in a particular part of the grocery store, and these beans don't join them. They're all out there with the vegetables. They're out there with the corn and the peas and the carrots. You know, they're not with the beans. I don't know if you've ever noticed that, but anyways, that doesn't make sense anyway. But I'm going to be looking for a concept, a means of action, and a social result here. Now, the concept that I'm looking for is I don't want these beans in the neighborhoods, in my neighborhood, okay? I don't want them around me. I already know that I don't want them in my restaurants. I don't want them in the public arena. Now, I don't want them to come into my neighborhoods. So the next concept that I'm looking for is segregation. I want to segregate and make these beans not a part of the community. So the concept that I'm looking for is segregation. And segregation, in order for me to carry out my segregation, in order for me to make sure that these beans don't come into my neighborhood, is, of course, I'm going to go to my legislators to see if I can pass laws. So the means of action by which to carry out the segregation is the law. I make it legal, okay? I'm making the process legal so that it ensures that these beans do not live in the same neighborhood as these beans, okay? So that's very important to understand. And what happens is that there's a social result for these beans. And the social result is that these beans now become isolated. And when you have isolated that experience, well, that's very important to understand. So let's take a look at the overall picture and understand what it is that I've been introducing, simply because I don't like canned green beans. These green beans are slimy, green, and alien. And I have gone from prejudice and I moved it out into the public arena. So if we can get that first PowerPoint slide up so that I can go over what it is that I've introduced in terms of the racialization process. Okay, so if we take a look at the concept on the left-hand side, in the center there's the means of action and then the social result. And this is known as the racialization process. This is understood by sociologists and anthropologists as well as historians with regards to practicing discrimination and segregation. So there's the concept, prejudice. The means of action was a stereotype, and the social result is avoidance. Then there's the concept of discrimination. And in order to carry out the discrimination, the means of action was I used the law. And as a result, the beings were disadvantaged. And then there's the concept of segregation. The means of action was to make it legal, and so you isolated a community. So students, please understand this racialization process. This is very important as part of the immigrant experience in the United States, and we're going to be taking a look at it. But I'm just using beans as a metaphor so that we can understand and appreciate these experiences. So let's understand now, as Americans, we have come to recognize that everyone has been educated and influenced in society by this process known as racialization. And so what I want to introduce you to is understanding the concept of racism, because racism is an instrument of power used by those in power to perpetuate this power. And what I want to do is I want to understand this process carefully, because since the inception of this nation, racism and sexism have operated most effectively at the national level by keeping specific populations in a disadvantaged position through policies that called for the elimination of Native peoples, the enslavement of Africans, the disfranchisement of poor whites, the discrimination against women, the conquest of war of Mexican territory, the conquest through war of Mexican territory, the denial of citizenship to Asians, and the creation of an apartheid system that's meant to create a racialist order. So, again, the racialization process, racism, it's like diarrhea being inherited. It runs in your genes. But nonetheless, all Americans have a prejudice. And think about all of the prejudices that you have about all of the people that make up this nation. What are all the jokes that you know or you heard about blacks, about Native peoples, about Mexicans? about Asians, about women. Think about that, okay? We all have prejudices. And of course, a prejudice is a personal expression. So we have a means of action by which to carry out this prejudice, and that is the stereotype. So I'm using the beans because the beans, you know, I don't like canned green beans. I don't. But that's my personal prejudice. It's just that when I carry out my personal prejudice and put it in the public good, then I'm practicing racism, okay? Now, as far as my personal prejudice is concerned, that's just me being bigoted. I'm not a racist just because all of a sudden I don't like these canned green beans. No, I become a racist when I take it out into the public arena and I put these beings in a disadvantaged position. When I do that, then I'm a racist. But if it's my personal level and my personal prejudice, I'm not being racist, I'm just being bigoted and really dumb because of my personal prejudice, you know, because, you know, canned green beans are good. It's just I don't like them, okay? So, again, when I take my personal prejudice and put it out into the public arena, where I am going to be putting somebody in a disadvantaged position, then I'm being a racist. But as long as I just don't like them, well, I'm just a bigoted, I'm a prejudiced person. And then, of course, once we carry out the personal prejudice to the societal level, with the law behind me, that is what calls for, that is the legal discrimination against the population. Okay, so with the law behind me, the population that I'm discriminated against is now in a disadvantaged position.